may still be coming in, but we want to make sure we finish within the hour. David, if you haven't started the recording, you may go ahead and do so, which may answer a question some of y'all have. This will be available. If your colleagues are missing this, then a recording will be posted at the MBIA website, or at least a link to the recording. Everyone will be on mute, though you should see a chat box. So if you have any questions, feel free to submit those. My colleague, David Simons, many of you all know, he's working behind the scenes to make sure this all goes off without a hitch. David, you're welcome to interrupt me with a question if it comes in, you think it's timely, or we can save them till the end. Real quick, Metrostudy, Meyers Research is now a satellite company, basically. Bird Eye is a very recent acquisition, and we have satellite aerials that are updated sometimes within days, almost always within a few weeks. So if you are interested in having the most up-to-date aerials as opposed to the Google aerial photography, which will be a couple of years old, please get in touch with my other colleague, Morgan Giovannucci, or get in touch directly with me, and I'll get you in touch with Morgan. Also, MBIA would like to thank today's sponsors, Lakeside Title Company and Morris and Ritchie Associates, Engineering and Planning. How about these two companies? A very difficult time for everyone, and the association, MBIA, doing everything it can to make sure that our industry is essential, and that our voices are heard at the legislative area, and missing out on having in-person meetings. Thank you to Lakeside and MRA for stepping up forward and sponsoring today's event. We're going to start with a quick poll, kind of an icebreaker, and we'll have two more, I think, substantive polls later, but to just kind of get everybody's attention off to the right foot. David, yes. What are you wearing on your feet right now? I did ask my wife, I consulted with her on this to make sure there would be a for everybody.
We have about 76% of the vote in, 10 more people left. You're not obligated to vote, but we are Americans here, so if you would like to exercise your freedoms, we highly encourage it.
That's right, David. Thank you. I'm really curious about this.
All right, 83% of the vote.
I think that's a quorum.
All right, and we'll wrap it up. And if you can see the results, Ben.
Bare feet and socks. Very good. A scant few wearing dress shoes. I'm sorry. Thank you for indulging me. I doubt it's a question on anybody else's mind. I always wonder. I myself am wearing Crocs, and I know those are out of style, but it's just me and my family judging me. All right, let's begin with the presentation. Thanks, David. We'll have another poll in a few moments. So starting with the national economy, this looks like a bad joke. It's certainly almost a nightmare to have had a record consecutive months of employment gains during this record long expansion. And then, we lost a revised 800,000 jobs in March, and we braced ourselves for the job losses in April, and they exceeded 20 million job losses in just 1 month. The previous worst month on record was 2 million job losses right after World War II. So I think I saw an article that unprecedented is getting thrown around a lot, but that is a good description. If we look at the types of jobs being lost, and this is in the last 2-month period, those we just saw, the vast majority of those would be in the most recent month from March to April. There's leisure and hospitality losing over 8 million jobs. Almost 85% of those leisure and hospitality jobs would be specifically in the accommodation and food services industry. Retail trade, you see health services. So the red bar is the number of jobs lost. The percentages is the percent of jobs lost in that one industry. So there's really not a close second to leisure and hospitality. The only area to gain jobs, by the way, would be the federal government, as state and local governments have lost 6% of jobs. So a big problem warrants a big response. And so the Federal Reserve is doing what they can do. They're the lender of last resort. They cannot give away any money. They're a bank. They can only lend money and purchase assets. And you can see some of the things that the Federal Reserve is doing. And also part of the CARES Act, the Paycheck Protection Program was a big part of that, funded by the Small Business Administration and administered by banks. And you can see some of the provision. And I guess it is you see the word loan there in the first, second bullet point in quotation marks. If you use it to meet these certain criteria, then the loan is forgiven. It becomes a grant. So there are $350 billion in the first round. It went very quickly, and Congress let loose a second round, another 320 or so billion. And actually, as quickly as the first round went, we're a few weeks into the second round, and all the money has not been used. So clearly it went to those that really wanted to take advantage of it. And I think also some concerns have arisen about some of the criteria to turn that loan into a grant, that businesses want to be sure that that they understand all those provisions. Another big part of the CARES Act is the enhanced unemployment benefits, administered by states, funded by state and federal government, and also private employers. So you can see that in Maryland, it's standard unemployment benefits, $430 a week for 26 weeks. Some states will add for dependents. And then the enhanced benefits is another $600,000 per week. And last time we met a few weeks ago, I was misinformed on how long that would last. I'm not sure what I communicated, but the $600 per week bump ends on July 31st, though the CARES Act does call for an additional 13 weeks of unemployment if needed, but not past December 31st. So during the overlap period, which would end on July 31st, $1,000 a week in income, plus the one-time stimulus checks. And so actually, Wall Street Journal reports that roughly half of American workers make more on unemployment than they did at their jobs. But if you're called back into work, then you go back into work. You won't receive your unemployment benefits. You're not supposed to, at least, if you've been offered your job back. And clearly, this is helping renters and homeowners stay current. Looking at the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, that red line there is going to be the record low, 3.23%. It's never been lower in history. So this is certainly a draw for consumers. They have enhanced buying power right now, more so than we've pretty much ever seen historically. But there's a counter to that, and that is mortgage credit availability index. We talked about this last time. I don't believe I showed this graph. The jumbo loan program was hit the hardest. FHA has allowed, and the reason for that is, there are some now part of the CARES Acts, or maybe not specifically the CARES Act, but the response to the health crisis by Congress has been to provide protections for renters and homeowners from from foreclosure. You can request to go into forbearance instead, but that has, in the mortgage industry's mind, created some risk because mortgage services, for instance, are still on the hook to pay the investors, even if the borrower, takes a pause on making their payments. Keeping in mind that forbearance doesn't mean forgiveness. The lost payments will have to be made up by the homeowner. The jumbo loan program was hit the hardest. FHFA has allowed Fannie and Freddie to purchase mortgage loans that are in forbearance, so that does help. But the FHFA decision did fall short of helping the mortgage servicers, so they are still on the hook, at least last I checked. So how many loans are in forbearance? And it's the number according to Black Knight. Their most recent press release, 4.7 million homeowners are in forbearance. And to me, that's actually smaller than might have been expected. And the rate of increase has been slowing quite a bit. So overall, that 4.7 million represents 8.8% of active mortgage loans are in forbearance. 7% of Fannie Freddie loans, those would be the least risky of the various loan types. The other category, including jumbo, would be 9.2% in forbearance, and then FHA VA loans have proven to be the most at risk with 12.4% in forbearance so far, if you consider forbearance to be a measure of risk, and I believe I would. So let's turn now to the local economy. So we just looked at the April job numbers for the nation. That is not available yet at the metro level or the state level. So I'm continuing to look at the initial claims for unemployment. We have this for Maryland. In fact, you'll see in a minute, we have it for counties in Maryland. So there's nearly 500,000 new claimants for unemployment. You can see compared to the worst part of the Great Recession, that's not the entire Great Recession, that was the worst part of it though. It really is no comparison. It did drop a few weeks ago. There was a new online filing system that was part of the CARES Act that Maryland was required to update that so people could file online. It did not go well initially, and so I think that might have been why it bounced back. It also may have bounced back because the state was able to process more applications more quickly. But anyway, either way, we're looking at a huge impact on the economy. But the good news is, if you're looking for silver linings, and I think we all are, is that the Mid-Atlantic is faring pretty well. Maryland and Virginia would be in the top 13 of all states for the percentage of claims filed as a percent of the entire labor force. As far as if you look at the most risky industries, we just saw it a few slides ago with the national job loss numbers by industry: retail, hospitality, food industries. That's where those jobs would be most at risk. And so these states shown here would be the states that have the fewest of those types of jobs, where there's less dependency. And you think about the riskiest would be places like Nevada and Las Vegas, or Hawaii, the tourism. Those would be very at risk. And yet there are many other factors that would determine, how your state is doing. How bad the virus infections are in that state. Consumer behavior can vary. Shutdown policies, we've seen a pretty wide variety there. So actually, Kentucky and Georgia would not have expected to be the hardest hit, but they have, with 30% of their job forces filing claims for unemployment. Wyoming, which would have been thought to be a high-risk state, is doing much better than expected, as is Utah. So we are looking at unemployment claims filed so far, and this is our own research here. And any metro area in blue would be among the certainly severely impacted, but among the lesser impacted. And so there it is. I mentioned Las Vegas, also Orlando, Los Angeles, Houston being hit by the very low oil prices. And if you look at current implied unemployment rate, basically an estimated unemployment rate, there's DC Metro among the smallest. And that is fitting with the reputation of the Mid-Atlantic, and certainly the DC Metro area, that the company town reputation as based by the federal government does help us mitigate against downturns. Doesn't mean we're not affected by it. Clearly we are, but we have a little bit of insulation more so than a lot of areas do. Richmond, Virginia, by the way, you see also on there. So if we forecast unemployment, and this is Moody's research, the lighter blue is going to be the areas that are expected to be less, certainly impacted, don't get me wrong, but less impacted compared to other metro areas. And you can see our area in the light blue is expected to do well. If we look at initial claims for unemployment by county in Maryland, this is over the past 8 weeks, which corresponds with when unemployment claims started to balloon. And you would expect those top 5 counties to have the most claims for unemployment because they employ the most people. Those 5 counties account for 2/3 of Maryland's labor force. But if we look at the number of claims as a percent of that county's labor force, then we get an idea of relative impact. And there is DC. You know, the 2 main suburban counties of the DC metro, at least on the Maryland side, Montgomery and Prince George, as you can see, doing better than the Baltimore area counties, specifically Baltimore City and Baltimore County being hit the hardest. Doesn't mean Montgomery and PG haven't felt it. We're just talking relatively speaking. So the Paycheck Protection Program I mentioned earlier, round 1 versus round 2, you can see how many more loans were processed in round 2. This is as of last week, so this is a little bit dated, but it's, you know, the media was describing the demand for PPP loans as slowing to a trickle. So maybe, I don't know how much it's changed, but you notice the 2 big changes is that in fewer days, banks were able to process quite a few more loans on behalf of the SBA, and then the loan amount is much smaller than it was in round 1. It appears that the bigger companies were able to leap on this program and take advantage of it. The smaller companies have been more apt to do that. The loan amount is based on your payroll, I believe. So let's now switch to the housing market, and we'll start with the resale market. And so this is, each column here is the percent change in listings from a year ago. And so while we were adding a few listings back in the fall and winter of 2018, really ever since then we've seen a pretty strong run on demand. So in fact, probably none of this was health crisis related until you get to April. Maybe part of March and certainly April, you can see kind of an acceleration in the decline in listings. And so that leaves us with, as of April, usually April is when we're starting to add more listings, and we're seeing the months of supply of listings come up. I tend to look at months of supply rather than days on market. But you can see how totally flat it is as consumers, or at least sellers, are taking their homes off the market or not putting their homes on the market because they're concerned about presumably having people come into their house and potentially contaminating their house. So this is, we're seeing, you know, record low levels of resale inventory in Maryland. Here's how it breaks down by county, and I'm comparing April compared to April of 1 year ago. Keep in mind that a year ago we did not have enough listings. And so now we clearly don't have enough listings. Look at the decline in Hartford, Baltimore City, you know, Frederick, Charles, all of these really. The only exception would be DC, which saw a slight gain in the number of listings, and I think a pretty flat on the terms in terms of the number of sales. So when you have so few listings, you know, we were starting to see home prices accelerate. You know, the spring was doing really well for builders and for homeowners, as far as, you know, builders in terms of sales and being able to raise prices, and on the resale side, you know, stronger pricing on the resale side. And so we'll see what happens with the with home prices given the new environment that we're dealing with. I just know where it was and where it was going was we're on our way to having very strong resale home price appreciation and new home price increases. So the National Association of Realtors asked realtors, you know, have any of your home sellers recently reduced price to attract buyers? And you can see more than a majority, you know, 3 and 4 had not lowered the price, and those that had was typically less than 5%. And I had heard that a lot of buyers out there are bargain hunting, thinking, finally, here's a recession, I can go get a cheaper home at an extremely low mortgage rate. And so the realtors ask, are buyers expecting lower prices? And this is over time, and you'll see that yes, they generally were expecting lower prices, but we're seeing their expectations change, where we're seeing an increasing number of buyers not expecting lower prices, and those that are expecting lower prices, less and less, generally speaking. If you look at those three sets of columns on the right, those numbers are falling. So the bargain hunters are generally finding some disappointment, really because, as we just looked at, there's not enough supply out there. It's really it's a mix of supply and demand that could affect prices. Clearly demand is taking a hit, but there's so little supply that I don't see much reason for consumers, or even home builders for that matter, to concede too much on pricing, if at all. And so we saw that listings, the number of listings were down. That's a snapshot of inventory. Look at the activity levels here as far as homes being delisted. This is in Maryland, the 2019. I looked at 2018. That's a pretty typical pattern in 2019. And you can see a strong acceleration in the number of homes that were delisted. This is according to Redfin. Look at the number of new listings. And so that was on track until the health crisis. And now we're seeing a very large drop in the number of new listings. And so you hear the term pent-up demand a lot. To me, this would be pent-up supply. And the question is, those that would have normally listed their homes about now, when we're starting to see listings, accelerate and load up for the strong summer, late spring, early summer demand, clearly that's not materializing. Is this going to appear in the fall, in the winter? Are people going to wait a full year until next year and kind of see what the environment is like? We don't know, and we'll have to keep an eye on what happens to new listings and overall resale. So not only has there been a hit in new listings, but we just saw that there have been quite a few delistings. So what had been coming onto the market earlier, we can be sure that quite a few of those were delisted. And if you're looking at home prices, it's interesting to look at median price per square foot of those new listings. So we know there's fewer new listings, but throughout the year, those that have been coming on were priced about 5% higher on a price per square foot basis. And that represents about a $20,000 delta, or an increase compared to last year. So what about on the demand side? Those were supply side indicators. Here's still looking at the resale market, pending sales. And here is going to be your pent-up demand. Though I am encouraged to see the number of pending sales in the most recent couple of weeks start to accelerate. And this is from Redfin, so you can track this on a weekly basis if you want. But this is encouraging to see that coming back, and it is consistent with some information from Showing Time. This is again for the state of Maryland. Showing Time is a tool that realtors will use to make appointments with sellers. Even home builders will use this, or allow work with realtors in Showing Time. And you can see that we bottomed in very early April, and the interest in making appointments for home shoppers has been coming up quite a bit. And so this is certainly a positive, and builders are reporting increases in traffic. So that brings us to our next audience participation. A quick poll, David, if you don't mind bringing that up, please.
Yeah, of course. Switch over.
What do you expect home prices to do the rest of this year? There's no wrong answer. And we're not tracking your answers either, by the way. This is an anonymous poll.
All right, 87% reporting. Give it another 10 seconds. All right.
I'm curious to see. All right, very good. So go up a little or stay flat. It'd have been interesting to see, what people's thoughts might have been before they saw the supply constraints. Though I have a feeling a lot of people are up to speed on that. I'm with you. I think my guess is it'll stay flat. I guess it depends on, the rest of this year and then next year. I'm a little concerned that it might take us a little longer to dig out of this thing than some people think. And even in the last time we met, we did a poll on as far as the length of the recovery and the curve. And I was appreciative that the audience had pretty realistic expectations of the recovery period here. I do think for the rest of the year, it could go up a little bit because of the momentum we established earlier in the year. I think next year it could stay flat, maybe even drop a little bit, but not a lot. And I don't think enough to warrant, consumer strategizing to try to, bargain hunt. Really, it's going to be the change in interest rates might be the most influential thing, not so much home prices. All right, very good. We'll have one more poll a little bit later. So this is the new home market. And this is Metrostudy's field verified starts and closing. We visit all new home subdivisions every 90 days with generally 10 lots or more. Some of them have fewer than that we'll go visit. Keep in mind that we have Zonda information as well. We get information from sales offices every month with Zonda, and then Metrostudy also does a weekly builder poll. So we'll have information from all sources here. Starts were actually trending down a little bit in Maryland. It was minus 7% through March, and that's going to be pre-COVID, keep in mind. And that is really a measure of the supply constraints. We were having, builders reported pretty good year of sales last year. And I think a lot of that had to do with the smaller community count. So the per project sales were much better. And then as strong as sales were at the beginning of this year, that really didn't have time to show up in our starts numbers. I do think we'll have a pretty decent second quarter in terms of our starts numbers because of the strong first quarter sales, at least through mid-March. But I really look to supply constraints here for a big part of the reason why we had leveled off in the most recent few quarters. So I mentioned the community count. And so you can see the decline there. Now in March, in the second half of the month, mid to second half of the month, we're getting price sheets and calling on builder sales offices. And so could this community count be lower because of the health crisis and builders were transitioning to by appointment only? And, it's possible. But the trend was already clearly downward. And I do think it would have been down in the first quarter again, even though maybe not quite as down as this would appear to be. So, we asked a question of builders. I'll show the results in a little bit about, how do you expect to do relative to plan? And, so every builder will have a goal for the calendar year, or at least for their fiscal year. And a lot of that's going to be based on how many communities they expect to have open. And so, builders have certainly a good idea of their pipeline and what'll be closing and what'll be opening. And this is certainly going to inform their forecasted plans. So which counties are seeing the biggest decline? And you can see Prince George's had, this is amazing to me, 40 fewer active new home communities at the end of March compared to this March a year ago. Anne Arundel, that's nothing to sneeze at, 11 or 12, a net decline there. Frederick, a net decline of 10 or so, but they all pale compared to Prince George's had an especially difficult time replacing sold out subdivisions. That's by geography. If we look at this by price range, then you can see that particularly that $300,000 to $600,000 price range, really the heart of the market here, the lower price being more townhome. The upper prices could be either towns or single family, depending on the location. Look how many more sold out projects than new projects we've been able to bring on. So I showed this chart last time. And this is going to be kind of a then and now look. This is a 15-year history of finished lots on the ground. We call them vacant developed lots. And heading into the Great Recession, we had a little over 13,000 finished lots in Maryland and growing. And even though demand fell off at that red graph there, lot deliveries tend to finish out. And so we ended up with nearly 16,000 finished lots on the ground. But heading into in this new recession, we had not even 11,000 finished lots on the ground, and it was a shrinking footprint. So these are the supply constraints I was talking about. And so we asked builders in the Mid-Atlantic what best describes your land strategy. And I'm comparing these numbers to the national figures. And you can see that 30% of, really almost a third of local builders are sticking with their original land acquisition plans. And that is a testament to how land constrained this area is, because we saw, sales drop off 40 to 50% right in smack dab in the middle of spring selling season. The good news is that a lot of builders have a good chance to meet their plan because of how strong it was earlier in the year. A few builders are getting more selective, so 40% are getting more selective with land acquisition compared to, though, nationally, nearly 60%. So in this land constrained market, I would expect the builders here to remain more focused on land compared to nationally, and that appears to be the case as far as what they're communicating to us. We also asked builders, what are your intentions with spec inventory? These are weekly emails sent out to home building leaders only, so presidents and CEOs, division presidents, CEOs. We're getting about 20 to 25 respond every week. And so you can see that, again, we're not a big spec build market. We're seeing demand from consumers being strongest for specs, or even consumers that have a contract to have a home built. They're wanting to accelerate that as quickly as possible, perhaps to take advantage of the extremely low mortgage rates, perhaps because they fear interruption in the supply line or the ability of builders to deliver homes. Regardless, there's an urgency right now. And so builders are really wrestling with how many specs to put on the ground. Some are being more aggressive, some are still being cautious. But you can see, generally speaking, builders here are being more aggressive with specs by sticking with plan despite the backdrop, or maybe building fewer, but even that number is much lower than the national number. So this is new home inventory. We looked at land earlier. This is homes that are either under construction or finished with no evidence of occupancy. This is field verified, curbside survey. And again, we're talking about over 7,000 units in process. At the time, a lot of these were sold. We know that a lot of them ended up canceling. Now, heading into this, again, far fewer units in process, 5,220. I'm talking to builders. The first thing builders do when you get a downturn like this is they kind of vet their backlog, those homes that are under contract, they're actively trying to get built and closed. And builders, for the most part, have been really pleased with their ability to keep their backlogs. And this is in an environment where we're seeing, again, more stringent underwriting standards on the mortgage side. So there certainly have been some cancellations there. The cancellation rate is up, but if you look at cancellations per project, I've been really impressed with how the consumer has followed through on their commitments so far. So this is a weekly report. I only showed this versus the Zonda monthly, which it's better, it's more comprehensive. But we don't have all of April fully vetted yet, that we're getting close to that. So this is into May, and it's a weekly survey, but I've kind of monthed it out, if you'll let me make that a verb, to the monthly sales rate per sub. So we were approaching on average, 4 sales per project. Most of the builders reporting here are going to be larger builders. It's 40% sampling. There's very few smaller builders. If I had more smaller builders, it might have brought that down some. I'm sure it would. But even though we took a hit, we fell way above trend to way below trend. But it appears to have bottomed out, and that is really encouraging. The builders that I've talked to, just seeing all the unemployment claims, the shutdown orders, I think builders are pleased with how well this industry is faring and how well their business is doing, relatively speaking. And it looks like we've hit bottom, and that's encouraging. So we asked builders, what are your expectations for 2020 now compared to your original plan? And certainly, most expect to be, 20% below that original plan. And that's similar to the national numbers. But and look at the, those builders, a third of them that are answering the poll expect to, have they expect to make plan. And that's, again, speaks to how strong it was at the beginning of the year. It could also speak to builders that have more first-time product, because the first-time buyer product is what's selling the best right now. It's generally going to be below the FHA limits. There's a lot of demand there. It's where the first time, it's where the millennials are, such a big demographic group. And so I would say the builders that have first-time product, they're more likely to have a best chance of meeting plan this year. So builders were raising prices through or into March and through March. So this is a measure. On average, builders in Maryland raised prices $12,000 during that first quarter. I had felt like this year, this is before the health crisis, where, we had a pretty good last year, and I thought it was pointing to a better year this year. I didn't anticipate a big increase in gross sales or starts just because of the supply constraints. So I felt like it would be a year of improved margins for builders. They would get all the sales they wanted and at higher margins because they'd be able to raise prices. And that was playing out perfectly until all this hit. So since then, I'll draw your attention to the last few weeks, certainly since March. The gray bars you can see were price increases in the first few weeks of the year. And then lately, builders really aren't touching price. We ask them about it. They're communicating the same things. Builders are boosting incentives where they have to. The most typical thing they'll do is help with closing assistance. And even that, they're communicating that they're starting to lighten up on the incentives. In fact, we're starting to see builders begin to raise prices. So I think if we meet again, or if if you're a client and you hear me speak to your group, I think we're going to start to see evidence of some price increases beginning to come back. So this is the final chart I'm showing before we get to some conclusionary thoughts. Weekly sales traffic per subdivision. This is not surprising. Builders have gone to by appointment only. That could be changing as Maryland is beginning to open back up. But the good news here is that the few buyers that are coming in the door, as you might suspect, are very serious. And so we're seeing very high conversion rates. And to see this stabilize where it has, again, to builders, this is an encouraging sign. You would look at this graph and think, oh, builders are struggling. And I mean, certainly the industry is taking a hit, but to see it bottom here, I think, is encouraging to a lot of people in the industry. So some conclusions here. University of Chicago has done the metro areas that have the most potential to have a lot of workers work from home. Now, this is an interesting laboratory experiment in a sense, this health crisis, to see how well working from home goes. Again, in conversations with builders, some of them are now fully bought in that, hey, we can be productive and have people work from home. I can readjust my office needs. Doesn't always mean getting rid of office, but maybe you're using office for other purposes. I've had other builders say, some people, need that oversight and management. Certainly new employees you'd think would need an office environment. So, or certainly inexperienced employees. I don't know, but is looking at the types of jobs that can be done at home, and the types that can't, retail trade or transportation, warehousing, construction, accommodation, food services. Those can't be done. Those are obviously on the job jobs. But a lot of professional, scientific, technical jobs, management jobs, educational services can be done at home. And DC is one of the leading countries. Baltimore is very high as well in terms of the potential to have employees work from home. So that leads to the last poll question, David, if you don't mind bringing up that, please.
All right, let's go ahead and launch this one.
I hope I worded this well. Do you expect your company's work from home policy to change? And I don't mean change compared to now. I mean change compared to where it was pre-health crisis.
All right, 77% of the vote is in. Just another 5-10 seconds here. 85%.
Good.
All right, let's check out the results.
Look at that. Do appreciate y'all's participation today. Hopefully it helps you stay focused. I know it's taxing. I've asked some people, are you webinar weary? I think to some extent we all are, and hopefully this helps a little bit getting us through. And yes, wow, 80% more flexibility to work from home. And that would be certainly applied to me as well. I actually had a lot of flexibility to work from home. I really didn't do so just because of the distractions from home and the ability to focus at work. But, we've pretty much closed our offices for the health crisis purposes. And I'm realizing that I can be productive at home, probably to my wife's dismay, because I think she likes having the place to herself sometimes. So we do have some kids about. Certainly now we do. But look at that, more flexibility to work from home, and think about the implications there on commute patterns and hiring, and especially where people can live. So thank you, David. So if we look ahead to some sentiment from builders and others, that is this going to increase suburban living? Is this going to increase? If you think about it, home building is most efficient when it can go into greener areas and build larger, more efficiently, to build larger developments and provide affordable housing, though further from work. And during this past cycle, which has been positive economically, we've really seen apartments be much more popular. And so now we're seeing articles, particularly out of New York, about people fleeing the city for the suburbs. And I've had some builders express that sentiment. And so the National Association of Realtors, I should have sourced them here, have your clients change their neighborhood preferences due to COVID-19. And we are not seeing that, at least from what realtors are saying. I was a little bit skeptical. Not every city is New York. DC is not as dense as New York is. So, but even that 5%, yes, moving away from the city downtown to the suburbs, that might not be insignificant. And we'll see how that changes. I myself am not expecting necessarily a flood to the suburbs, more so than I was expecting anyway. I do think the suburban building, I think there's, as the millennials age and mature and start families, I do think we were going to see a move to the suburbs anyway, honestly. And so I don't expect that to happen more than it would have, or at least not materially more, but I don't know. And it's a matter of speculation, and people smarter than me think it will. And so we will see. But so far, realtors are not communicating that is happening. So earlier, I alluded to state policy on COVID-19 restrictions. Do keep in mind that we in the Mid-Atlantic had been in 2 of the more restrictive states in the country. Maryland did open up on Friday, though they left it up to some specific jurisdictions if they wanted to keep the stay-at-home order in place. It's my understanding that Prince George's, Montgomery, and Baltimore City have done that. So Maryland might be better shown as that hashed yellow line, which would indicate regional reopening. Virginia would be blue, except for Northern Virginia. Northern Virginia officials sent a letter to the governor. The governor was ready to begin phase 1 of reopening last Friday at 5, I think. And Northern Virginia jurisdictions, some of them, wrote to the governor saying they would like to stay closed, they or at least keep the shutdown order in place, and they have done so. So that's why Virginia is in that striped hash. That does include the Mid-Atlantic area. And so, Georgia, I mentioned earlier how hard it was hit. Georgia is one of the first ones to open up. It's no wonder, when 30% of the people have filed for unemployment, you can understand to some extent how the governor would be anxious to try to get the economy back up. And so, we will see. It would not surprise me if this is technically one of the shortest recessions on record, where the recovery starts. But remember that to an economist, a recession begins basically where it peaked and it ends where it bottoms. So it's at the very worst. So once it starts to get better, that might technically be the end of a recession, but it's still going to feel like a recessionary environment until you get back closer to where you were before it started. And so, we'll see how that plays out. Here is Maryland's roadmap to recover. So it says last week, I think it was 2 weeks ago, beaches, state parks, and golf courses reopened. I've got golf buddies. I don't golf much myself, but I've got friends that golf a lot, and they were talking about all the Marylanders that were coming to Virginia, whose golf courses were open. Also in Maryland, fishing, boating, hunting, camping allowed again, that was a couple of weeks ago. And then last week, the state, except for those exceptions I mentioned, the state categorized businesses as low, medium, and high risk, and those low risk shops you see described there started to reopen. The governor's being very, understandably so, very flexible, and is ready to reverse course if there's a second outbreak. And they've communicated that residents can expect to wear masks and stay at least 6 feet apart in public for months to come. So I heard an economic interview where they're asking two economists, is this the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end of the crisis? And it was interesting to hear their responses. They were on different, it's a nuanced question anyway, and I think they each had a different answer. So we'll open up to Q&A in a little bit after I offer my final thoughts, if there are any. But there have been, the encouraging thing, I guess this is encouraging, I guess for deficit hawks, this is a discouraging thing, but trillions of dollars are being deployed to fight this crisis. Home building, we talked about this, home building holding up better than most industry, this region holding up better than most regions. I've described builders as the only game in town. Builders are being careful. You think about, a consumer who might go to somebody's home to visit a resale property that's still open. And, there's not going to be a sign out front. There's not going to be policy showing what they're doing. I wouldn't expect, at least, not typically. So I do think that home shoppers will have more confidence in a builder's ability to kind of roll out the red carpet smartly and manage this in a healthy way. And I mean literally healthy way. Whereas I'm sure, I know I as a consumer would not be as confident just going to somebody's house, not knowing how, who lives there. And anyway, you know what I'm saying. So the only game in town is a plus. Builders, by the way, before I go on, builders are going to have to really keep close eye on trends on the resale side, because I do expect some resale supply to come back, and builders won't be the only game in town at that point, and they'll have to be very careful. And I think when that happens, that's when the risk of, some flattening home prices, maybe some slightly falling home prices will emerge more so. We talked about the mortgage underwriting standards, and but mortgage rates are still driving. And when I say demographic factors, I mean, you look at the two largest demographic groups are going to be millennials and baby boomers. Millennials have a lot of potential to become more into the homeownership realm, and baby boomers are already strong into the homeownership realm. It's a time when their needs are changing. Those are drivers, though the baby boomer is more discretionary, and we're seeing them as far as, and there's the point I'm getting ready to make, active adults is probably the weakest sector right now. That and the high end, though again, I'm hearing builders start to offer some optimism, some early green shoots of hope that, they're starting to see this come back across all buyer types. So that is what I've got. What, if any questions come in, David, that we need to address, or if you want to submit them, please do so now.
No questions yet. So folks, if you'd like to ask Ben a question, please use the chat feature, just type it out and we'll read them off.
While we're waiting for that, if you have capacity to take in more webinars, every Wednesday at 2, our chief economist, Ali Wolf, and Tim Sullivan, our senior managing principal, we're getting thousands of people listening on these every week, and it is great content. So I encourage you to make that part of your weekly webinar schedule. And then on May 26th, Molly Carmichael will be doing the sales and marketing solutions for today's new normal. She has amazing information. You'll love that, especially on the sales and marketing side. And then I hope MBIA doesn't mind my promoting that for the sister organization on the Virginia side. I'll be doing an update next Wednesday for NBBIA members. Anything come in, David?
Not yet.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and wind it up. Thanks again to the sponsors, Morris and Ritchie Associates, and to Lakeside Title. We'll go ahead and close it out. You're welcome to contact me. If you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me directly. And we'll make this recording available to MBIA, who will post a link on the website. Thank you all very much. Best to you.